Let's turn to Genesis chapter 34, where we left off in chapter 33 last week. We remember, because the context is so important to our understanding of chapter 34, the context of chapter 33, at least the very end of it. God had called Jacob and told him, I want you to not only return to the promised land, as he was there in Haran with Laban, but he said, I want you to return to your kindred. I want you to return to your family. And this family was living in the city of Hebron. That's where his father Isaac was. And he was to return there. And the trip from Haran to Shechem, where he settled down, was really 98% of the trip. He obeyed God almost 100%. I mean, surely he grades on a class curve. Surely that final 2%, there's no consequences associated with it. Surely partial obedience is acceptable to him. Surely he just fills his word up with just extra words, and we've got to figure out which ones are important to obey and which ones aren't important to obey. And surely as he writes upon the fleshly tablets of our heart, there is some give and take. Surely there are negotiables. But there were no negotiables. When God said that he wanted Jacob in Hebron, he wanted Jacob in Hebron. And that's where Jacob needed to be. And instead, Jacob settled in Shechem. And it was a disastrous choice, as we're going to see in just a moment. But there is something that we need to look at before we move into the chapter, something that we had laid this foundation last week. But he gets to Shechem, and he knows he's not where he's supposed to be. But he builds an altar there anyway. And he builds an altar to God there in verse 20 of chapter 33, and he calls it Elohei Israel. Elohim, the God of Israel, and he uses his new name from God for the first time. And what he's basically communicating at this altar is that Elohim, God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, he is my God. There's only one problem with that, is he builds this altar in the midst of disobedience. And when we are walking in disobedience to God, it doesn't matter how many altars we build, willful disobedience to him. It doesn't matter how many chapters I read. It doesn't matter how many sermons I make it through. It doesn't matter how many books I read. None of that matters. And my disobedience is communicating that at this moment in time, he is not my God. For all of the altars and all of the religious activity and trappings I can surround my life with in order to take both my attention, the attention of my family, and the attention of people off of my disobedience. And so tonight, as we read really this tragedy of chapter 34, it's so important for us because we've come to meet with the Lord tonight, that if I'm walking in willful disobedience, you have no idea what danger you are in. The way of the transgressor is hard, the Bible says, and surely it is. It is to kick against the goads. It is a very rough road to go. The interesting thing here, and again the great exhortation of this passage is perhaps to parents and to fathers, because as we saw last week, and then we will finish with last week, as we saw last week, Jacob is going to get out of Shechem pretty well intact. But his family is going to be ravaged from this experience. As parents, it's so important for us to be obedient in terms of what we model before our children and where our disobedience and our obedience places our children is very important for us to look at. And so this is the situation. They're by Shechem. They have no business being in Shechem or near Shechem. Shechem is a Canaanite city. And the sinfulness, the absolute debauchery of the Canaanites, I mean, you would just take your vilest imaginations, and it was the norm among the Canaanites. especially if you take the worst of the sexual things. It would just there was no restraint as it related to that. Now Dinah, who was the daughter of Leah, the daughter of Jacob, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. A natural curiosity for a teenage daughter, to go out and see what is out there, what's happening, what are the young ladies like here in this culture that my father has planted us so closely to. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and violated her. She is not at fault here. At least I would put no fault on her, and I think that almost all of us would agree with that. She is there by design in terms of her father's choice, and what happens to her here, and she is essentially raped. The word there, as it talks violate, it means to afflict, to oppress. This was against her wishes. And she is raped by kind of the prince, the son of the king of this particular city. And his soul was strongly attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the young woman and spoke kindly to the young woman. And so Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, get me this young woman as a wife. And in that culture, as we'll see a little bit later on in verse 19, it talks about Shechem being more honorable than all of the household of his father in what it was that he did. Nothing. We are horrified by it. We're disgusted by it. What it is that he did here. But in his culture, what he's around with the number of temple prostitutes and the gross immorality that was before their eyes as just a religious practice, let alone in terms of their private lives, what he did was really a very small thing in his eyes and in the eyes of his father and the eyes of the people that constituted his people. And so he loves her as best as he understands love, and he desires for her to be his wife. And Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah, his daughter. And defiled means to render unclean. In other words, to spoil her for marriage. And his sons were with his livestock in the field, and so Jacob held his peace until they came. And then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. And the sons of Jacob came from the field, and when they heard it, the men were grieved. And the word grieved is more than grieved. It means literally, they were pained with anger. You can imagine. You can imagine. And in that culture, it was more than just having, if there could be something even more, than the type of anger that the raping of your sister would provoke in your heart and mind as a brother. But within that culture of the Hebrews, and certainly in the cultures that were a little more refined than the Canaanites, to take and to do this against a family or a family member was to sin against the entire family. We see it today in some cultures here in the world and in the United States of America. You mess with one of those family members, you've taken on the family. That's the way they felt. The brothers were the guardians of the sisters. And so this act of violence had not only come against her, but it was an act of violence against them also. They're very angry over this situation. They were grieved and very angry because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing which ought not to be done. And Hamor spoke with them, saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him as a wife." No apologies, no sense that anything's been done wrong here. "And make marriages with us, and give your daughters to us." Now, so far in the account, the only daughter of Jacob that we've come across in terms of the genealogies is Dinah. But he had many, many other daughters. And we must be very careful when you're dealing with genealogies in the Old Testament that those genealogies oftentimes only include significant people that we need to know about in order to follow the story or to follow a lineage. It doesn't mean that the genealogies are absolutely complete. There are a lot more people, a lot more children associated with Jacob than what we read in the genealogies. And so make marriages with us and give your daughters to us and take our daughters to yourself. And so you shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you. Dwell and trade in it, and acquire possessions for yourself in it. And then Shechem said to her father and her brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you ask is a bridal gift, is a dowry, just say it to me, and I'll give it to you. Ask me ever so much dowry and gift, and I'll give you according to what you say to me. At any price, but give me the young woman as a wife. But the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor, his father, and spoke deceitfully, because he had defiled Dinah, their sister. And now they're going to head into, as he says here, and it's important to note in verse 13, they're going to begin to deal in a deceptive manner, not only with Shechem and Hamor, but with the entire city. And what they are going to do is they are beginning to put their pieces in place to express their vengeance upon this group of people. We'll watch it unfold. And they said to them, we cannot do this thing, to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised. That was the mark of the Hebrew. And so that would be a reproach to us. But on this condition we will consent to you. If you become as we are, and that if every male of you is circumcised, then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. And they are absolutely lying here. But if you will not heed us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and be gone. And their words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. And so the young man did not delay to do the thing, because he delighted in Jacob's daughter, and he was more honorable than all the household of his father. And Hamor and Shechem, his son, came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, these men are at peace with us. Therefore let them dwell in the land and trade in it, for indeed the land is large enough for them. And let us take their daughters to us as wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men consent to dwell with us, to be one people, if every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised. Now, that is going to take a sales job by this head of this particular city. But he is a skilled politician, and so we see his methodology here in verse 23. Will not their livestock, their property, and every animal of theirs be ours? Sure, it's base motivation, but it is typical of politicians. Only, we'll rob one sector to, provide for another sector. There's nothing to this. Only let us consent to them, and they will dwell with us. And all who went out of the gate of the city heeded Hamor and Shechem his son. Every male was circumcised. All who went out of the gate of his city. Now it came to pass on the third day when they were in pain, and apparently in the peak of pain. We will not do great exposition as it relates to this. Sometimes the Bible will state the obvious, and it has done here. And the two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, all of them children of Leah, each took his sword and came boldly upon the city, and they killed every male. He became murderers right on the spot. And they killed Hamor and Shechem his son with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went out. And then the other sons of Jacob, they joined them now and came upon the slain and plundered the city, because their sister had been defiled. So they take the role of thieves and plunderers. They took their sheep, their oxen, and their donkeys, and what was in the field, and what was in the city, and what was in the field, and all of their wealth, all their little ones, their wives they took captive, and they plundered even all that was in the houses, even all that was in the houses. It is very, very interesting to me in this particular passage as I read chapter 34. It is a great Old Testament warning against the sin of wrath and anger and vengeance. Today you and I live in the United States of America in what has been called the age of rage. And the fuse that the typical person has in our culture is very, very short. And we must be very careful, especially if you are given to that as a particular weakness of your flesh. We must be very careful that we do not allow our fuse to be as the world's fuse. And here you have these men, and what Shechem did to Dinah was absolutely wrong. God would take vengeance. He reserves vengeance for himself, not for us. And my flesh wants vengeance as much as anybody's flesh. But he reserves it for himself. I think that one of the reasons that he reserves it for himself is just this kind of an account. Because once I give room to even the slightest amount of wrath, it's like a fire. It jumps my lines of containment so fast, and then it is out of control. That's why James speaks, and he writes, and he says, "Therefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to wrath." Have you ever been in a situation where I ought to be listening rather than talking? The next thing I know is I'm angry and my voice is raised and my blood pressure is high and the veins are popping out in my forehead and my neck, and I'm rolling now in this verbal expression of my anger, and then in a moment it can move beyond that and turn into something physical and dangerous, very dangerous. That's exactly what happened to them here. So they go in and they murder an entire city. There's no other word for it. They go in, doesn't matter that they're the sons of Jacob. This is pure, what we would call premeditated murder. They set it up, they planned it, and they went in and murdered an entire city. Wrath and anger gone out of control. So dangerous. And they murdered a whole city of innocent men. There was only one man who raped her. All of the men didn't. What about the men and the children and their wives, lovers of life, lovers of the sunshine, and lovers of breathing, and lovers of just the simple things in life? There was no reason for that to be recompensed upon their head. And so here they come and they wipe out an entire city. And in their uncontrolled anger and wrath, they became 1,000 times the murderer and the monster that Shechem ever was. And that's the way that wrath works. And that's the way that anger works. That work of the flesh, Galatians calls it. It's a work of the flesh. And for those who have difficulty in those areas, this is a great passage to heed. And sometimes that can be one of those areas that morning by morning as we pray to the Lord and say, "Lord, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one." That some of us can settle down and say, "Lord, and help me to be especially diligent and vigilant as it relates to this thing called wrath in the wicked society that I live in." And so it quickly turned completely out of control. And again, I think that is one of the reasons. I think there are several reasons why God tells us, and He speaks to us clearly as His children. He said, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay." I think the main reason is you and I don't know enough facts to bring forth vengeance. It's to be left to the law. It's to be left to the courts. It's to be left to the government, which is a divine institution. It doesn't mean that it always represents God well, but God has chosen for that to be the way things operate until He returns and sets up His kingdom. But I think another reason is that once we begin to give expression to vengeance, we have great difficulty knowing where to draw the line and where to stop. And so a tremendous warning that is here. There is one other thing that the Lord speaks to me from this particular passage in a strong, strong way, is that it really rebukes my flesh, and perhaps some of your flesh too, in my tendency that when I see a single person fail or sin or do wrong, the immediate tendency of my flesh is to then look upon the entire family as if they were all guilty of it. It's like a snap. Well, how could they let them do that? They must all be like that if they allow that to go on. The flesh will run like that until it's grabbed quickly by the grace of God and by the Spirit of God. And so pretty soon we can begin to cast judgments on entire families and nations based upon one man's action. You say, oh, we come to conclusions concerning entire nations based upon one man's action. I really doubt that. Oh yeah? Let me name a couple names. Saddam Hussein. I'll just bomb them all. Ayatollah Khomeini. It's a waste them. Level the whole thing and all their foolish parades and ranting and raving against the United States of America. And we must remember that we are citizens of the kingdom of God before we are any other citizen, as thankful as we are for our United States citizenship. But you can see how easily one man can take and become, in our eyes and in our minds, representative of an entire people, and he may not be at all. We don't know what is the typical attitude and heart and mind of the person in Iraq or in Iran. We have to be careful. It's a tendency of our flesh. They gave place to it, and it was absolutely a disaster. And then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have troubled me." And this is a very weak rebuke on the part of Jacob towards his sons. Now, he will rebuke them very strongly at the end of his life, but right now, he knows they're in serious trouble. And as we read through this, you'll get a feel for all the I, me's, and my's. He's pretty concerned about his own skin, because he realizes that all of these nations around him are going to turn on him and probably wipe him out in his mind, just like they had wiped out these inhabitants of Shechem. He said, "You have troubled me by making me obnoxious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites, the Perizzites. And since I am few in number, they will gather themselves together against me and kill me, and I shall be destroyed, my household and I." And so he's got a kind of a small worldview at this particular point. No real grief over what's happened at Shechem. He's concerned for his own skin. And then they said to him, "Should he treat our sister like a harlot?" Well, they had it right. Should he singular. The whole city didn't. They didn't need to kill everybody in the city. And so they try to justify what it is that they did, but God wasn't going to buy the justification. And then God said, and this is a tremendous thing, chapter 35, God said to Jacob, "Arise and go up to Bethel and dwell there." And so here's Jacob with his family. 2 of his sons are mass murderers. The rest of them are thieves. His daughter's been raped. Their reputation stinks before even the pagans. What they did there was something that even the people who were not the children of God would look upon and be astounded at the viciousness of it. And so what does Jacob do? What does he do? His whole family is out of control. And God comes in and says, "Jacob, you go back to Bethel. I want you to go back to Bethel. I want you to go back where we first met a long time ago. 30 years ago where we first met. You remember that it was when he was fleeing from his brother Esau, and as he was fleeing, it was there at Bethel that he laid a rock under his head, and then he had the dream and the ladder and the angels ascending and descending, and the ladder speaking of Jesus Christ and the divine activity surrounding him, and the ladder being a link between God and man. And God is speaking to Jacob and saying, this place and what you've got going on here, Jacob, is a mess. You better come back to the way that it was with me in the beginning. You better come back to when the link was strong, when your life was pure and your priorities were right. Things are the way that they are, Jacob, because you've moved from that. Now come back to Bethel. And it's one of the great messages that God can give us when everything is a total mess and we go, why and what do I do, God? And He says, go back to Bethel. Go back to the way that it was when you and I came to know one another. Jesus speaks very much the same thing as He writes to the church of Ephesus in the Revelation. He spoke to them as they were now doing all kinds of great things, had all kinds of great promises from God. But they had moved from a relationship with God. And God spoke to them and He said, remember from where you've fallen. Repent and return and go do your first works. And that's basically what God is speaking to Jacob here. Remember how it used to be. And remember what used to be in your life when we first met. And remember what was in your life when we first met. And remember what wasn't in your life when we first met. Remember the characteristics of that day and that time. And let's return to that. I haven't moved, Jacob. I haven't changed. But the sins and the weights that so easily beset us are beginning to attach themselves and have attached themselves very strongly to Jacob. He says, go back to Bethel. Get back there. Get back to the simplicity of that. When you only had a staff and a vial of oil, you had nothing. You're just dependent upon me completely and totally. Now everything's complicated with you, Jacob. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back to basics. Let's go back to when you first met me. Rise and go up to Bethel and dwell there and make an altar there, not at Shechem. Make an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you fled from the face of Esau, your brother. And Jacob said to his household, before he even heads out, he says to them, and to all who were with him, put away the foreign gods that are among you. Let's get rid of all of the things that have captured your minds. All of the things that have come in and robbed your mind from giving God the attention that He deserves. And your mind being placed on Him. What is it that's filled your mind? He says to him, we're going to put away all of the foreign gods that are among you and purify yourselves. What's come into your heart now? What is it that's made your life impure? What things are residing in your heart? Let's get rid of them. Purify yourselves and change your garments. Let's not dress like Shechem anymore. Let's not look like Shechem anymore. Let's not carry anything as it relates to Shechem with us. Let's be a different kind of people, a holy kind of people, a separated kind of people. Now, in our culture, in our day, in the New Testament, we don't associate that with a certain kind of dress. The Bible says we should dress modestly. And then everything else is kind of wide open, as you can see. But he calls them to this purity. And again, I would repeat, he brings them back and says, I want your hearts and your minds just like it was there at the beginning, when it wasn't filled with all of this other stuff. Get rid of all of it. Now, the interesting thing to me, and it's very interesting to me, is the personal pronouns that he uses here. He says, put away the foreign gods that are among us. No, he doesn't say that. He says that are among you. And he says, purify yourselves. yourselves and change your garments. And so he says, you yourselves, your. He doesn't say I, me, my, or we, us, we. Jacob had no part in these things. Jacob didn't have any little idols. Jacob wasn't involved in impure things. Jacob hadn't taken on the appearance of Shechem, but his family had. Here is a dad who is going along, and as it relates to his own walk with God, he's doing great. He's growing in the Lord. He's walking with the Lord. He's not involved in idolatry. He's not involved in impure things. He's not involved in all of this kind of stuff, but his whole family is. And it can be a great tendency among us as fathers that we can go along and we're saying, but my walk is fine. I'm growing like crazy. I'm growing in the Word, and I have no idols in my mind or in my heart, and my heart is pure before the Lord. But my family is a disaster. And God comes in and He speaks to him, and He says, to Jacob, and Jacob comes in, and basically what he does is Dad takes charge again of his household. He has a responsibility, not just for himself, but for his household. And that's harder than just having responsibility for yourself. And so God calls him, and Jacob obeys him. God calls him and says, Jacob, I want you to take charge of your family again. Take responsibility for your family again. And it is so important for us, so we can think in our own hearts, our own lives, where we can look around our homes, and we can look even as Jacob apparently did with Rachel. He apparently allowed her to continue to carry the idols that she had stolen from her father. Oh, all under the banner of love. We don't want to rock the boat. And so often as parents, we can look in our household or as dads and look and say, I'm doing fine, but I am greatly grieved at what I see. Just capture the hearts and minds of my wife and my children and what's in this place. And God says, go back to Bethel. Go back and take charge of your family again, your household. Oh, that will require putting away, purifying. It will require change. But it beats the alternative by a lot. And he said, as soon as we've done that in verse 3, then, after this has been done, then let us arise and go to Bethel. And I will make an altar there to God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and has been with me in the way which I have gone. And so they gave Jacob all of the foreign gods which were in their hands, and all their earrings which were in their ears. And Jacob hid them, buried them, representing death. He hid them under the terebinth tree, which was by Shechem. Let's leave Shechem in Shechem, but we're heading to Bethel. And they journeyed. And the terror of the Lord was upon the cities that were all around them, and they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. This was a supernatural terror that God had put in these other nations so that they didn't come in and wipe out the Jews here, the Hebrews. And so Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him. And he built an altar there, and he called the place El Bethel, because there God appeared to him when he fled from the face of his brother. Now Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried below Bethel under the terebinth tree, and so the name of it was called that. And then God appeared to Jacob again, and he came from Padan Aram and blessed him. And God said to him, your name is Jacob. And 30 years has passed since he was at Bethel last. And he was in Shechem between 8 and 10 years. It was a long time. It was a long delay. And God takes him now as he pulls him into Bethel, and he takes his little son right in front of his face and says, "You seem to have forgotten what I've called you to and for, so I'm going to remind you. Your name is Jacob, or is Israel, not Jacob. Do you like your other hip, Israel?" And he just comes in and reminds him of the call that God has on his life. And there are times where we can slip away, whether for an hour or a day or a week, and God comes in and He pulls our little face right up next to His, so to speak, and He reminds us, you are a Christian. You are not Damion Kyle in the old sense of that name and what it once represented anymore. That's through. That's over. The divine nature is in you. I have plans for you. And insert your name in that. And so he needed to be reminded. And God reminds him of the call that was upon his life. He says, your name is Jacob. You shall not be called Jacob anymore, but Israel shall be your name. And so he called his name Israel. And also God said to him, I am God Almighty, El Shaddai. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall proceed from you, and kings shall come from your body. And the land that I gave Abraham and Isaac, I give to you and to your descendants after you. I give this land. And then God went up from him into the place where he talked with him. And so Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he talked with him, a pillar of stone, and he poured a drink offering on it, and he poured oil on it. And Jacob called the name of the place where God spoke with him Bethel. And then they journeyed from Bethel, and when there was but a little distance to go to Ephrath, Rachel travailed in childbirth, and she had hard labor. This is the supreme love of his life. And now it came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said to her, Do not fear, you shall have this son also. And so it was, as her soul was departing, for she died, that she called his name Ben-Omi, which means son of sorrow. But Jacob, understanding that that's no kind of name to go through life with, called him Benjamin, which means son of my right hand. And so Rachel died and was buried on the way to this place that is Bethlehem. And Jacob set a pillar on her grave, which is the pillar of Rachel's grave to this day. You can imagine how immeasurably hard this would have been on Jacob. And so he comes back, and he gets back in line with the will of God, and yet Deborah dies, and the love of his life, Rachel dies. Can these things, these kinds of things happen when we're in the center of God's will? Yes, they can. Yes, they can. And it gets even worse. And Jacob set that pillar, and then Israel journeyed and pitched his tent beyond the tower of Eder. And it happened when Israel dwelt in the land that Reuben went, his oldest son, and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard about it. And he doesn't do anything at this point in time. He seems to have not been a very strict disciplinarian, but he deals with it at the end of his life, and he rebukes Reuben for this. And this act of Reuben, going in to his father's concubine, was an act that was going to, no doubt, broke Jacob's heart a great deal. It costs him the birthright, and Reuben, God speaks, or Jacob speaks to his son Reuben and says to him that he was the excellency of dignity and power. This guy had it all. I mean, he had his whole future out in front of him. But he said, as unstable as water, you shall not excel. This man with a great heritage, this man with a great future, great potential. But because he was as unstable as water in this area of sexual purity, it costs him everything. It costs him the birthright. You must be very careful. Very careful. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. The sons of Leah were Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. he lists these 12 now, and they become the 12 tribes of Israel. And pretty scary group, aren't they? I mean, that's a wild group to build a nation on. It takes God to get something good out of a group like this, and this group here, this building. And the sons of Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin, and the sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, were Dan and Naphtali, and the sons of Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, were Gad and Asher, and these were the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Padan Aram. And then Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre, or Kirjath Arba, which is Hebron. He finally gets where he's supposed to be, and there where Abraham and Isaac had sojourned. Now the days of Isaac were 180 years. He lived 40 years longer than he thought he would. And so Isaac breathed his last and died and was buried, gathered to his people, being old and full of days, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. In chapter 36, if you read chapter 36 by way of preview, you understand that I will not read chapter 36 for you. It is a genealogy. And I don't care what's hidden in a genealogy. I'm not going to try and read all those names. You can go get a book on genealogies and sort it all out. All we need to know about chapter 36, as far as I'm concerned, is what was revealed to us in verse 1, and that is, now this is the genealogy of Esau, who is Edom, and then what is told us in verse 43, these are the chiefs of Edom according to their habitations and the land of their possession. Esau was the father of the Edomites. All that we need to know, really, is that the Edomites were the descendants of Esau, the brother of Jacob. Now, Esau didn't, as we would say as young kids, didn't really pound Jacob in his lifetime. I mean, he was angry and things worked and different things. He didn't really vent his vengeance upon Jacob, but his descendants would. The Edomites would become a thorn in the flesh of the children of Israel throughout their history, and so it was expressed in that way. In chapter 37, Genesis takes a turn now, and we begin to look at, with some, incredible depth as it relates to one of the sons of Jacob, and his name being Joseph. And this passage here, all the way through to the end, I suppose that next to the book of Job has given more comfort to God's people than maybe any other passage in all of the Bible. Really tremendous. When you are in deep waters and you are in having real difficulties and real trials and there's that loss of perspective that comes with those kinds of things, it's always good to turn to this account concerning Joseph. It's one of the passages that I ask people to read more than maybe any other passage in counseling when they're in those situations. And occasionally we find ourselves in such situations. But let me say a couple things before we get into this section of Scripture. I think it is encapsulated by a passage in the New Testament in the book of Romans chapter 8. And I ask you to turn there just to build a foundation. I don't know how far we'll get in this chapter if we're going to be building foundations here and there, but we need to do that. From chapter 37 all the way to the end now of the book, it is really puts flesh and blood upon the truth of Romans chapter 8, verses 28 and 29. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to His purpose. That's Joseph, and that's you and me. And then, lest we should begin to define what we think good is, he moves on and he defines it for us. For whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, God works all things together for good in our lives because we love Him and we're the called according to His purposes, but He defines good as Christ-likeness and not stuff. And so we look at how He works in our lives, and truly He does work it together for good because it makes us like Jesus Christ. Now, if you take, there's a lot of commentaries on Genesis, and they will get into in great depth how Joseph is a type of Jesus Christ. I'm not going to do that. I think it's tremendous. Sometimes I look at some of that and I just go, okay. Okay, so Joseph was sold for 20 shekels of, silver, and Jesus for 30, and so, okay. Wow. I suppose there are minds that really get something out of that. To me, it's a 10 shekel difference. I still didn't. I have trouble connecting here in terms of, and there are, and I'm making fun of some of you that really into this kind of thing. Maybe not intentionally. It would never be my intent to do that, but sometimes the stuff breaks down a little more quickly than I like to see it break down, and all of the weight that we can put on these kinds of things. I think that Joseph is a type of Jesus Christ, and he is a type to the degree that is necessary to communicate this truth. That what God put Joseph through, He put Joseph through to make Joseph like Jesus. And what God puts you and I through, He puts us through in order that we might be a type of Him in one sense, and that we are being conformed into His image. Now, one of the other verse that's important as it relates to this passage, and then we'll move back to it, is in Romans chapter 5. Because God is going to give Joseph very early in his life here, and early in chapter 37, great promises concerning what He's going to do through Joseph's life. These are excellent, excellent promises. But what Joseph doesn't know, and what oftentimes we fail to recognize, is that there is tremendous preparation that can occur between the time that the promises are given to us in terms of God's call upon our life and then the fulfillment of those promises. And all of these things happen to us in order that character might be developed in our lives. Character is not something that's talked about very much today. Character as being some supreme thing. But it's very important to God. And God speaks in Romans chapter 5, and He says, and not only that, verse 3, but we also glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance. That is, as we continue to keep moving forward in the trials that are a part of our lives, that are conforming us into the image of Christ, as we move forward, we discover one thing for sure. God is faithful. God is faithful. God is faithful. God is faithful. And then perseverance develops, produces, or works character, and character hope. And so when I see what He's done in my life back here and how faithful He's been, then I look at the future with a confident expectation. And all the while, between these two things, character is being developed in my life. Define character. Jesus Christ. Again, that's the character that's being worked into our lives. Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. And this is the genealogy of Jacob. Joseph being 17 years old, kind of a young guy. And he was feeding the flock with his brothers. So a hard-working young man, by the way, as we'll see. And the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. And you can look at this and say, well, the little tattletale. The little snitcheroo, or a little rat. What do we got, But really, as we see his character unfold, that's probably not the case. These sons were probably involved in some activity that was putting the entire family in jeopardy in terms of what they were doing and how they were handling the flocks and these things. And it really strikes at the work ethic and the responsibility and the integrity that Joseph had. He didn't like it, and he came back and he told his dad what in the world was going on. So this isn't a character flaw. This is something that happens in people who have character. It troubles them. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than all his children. Mistake number one. Could it get worse? Yes. Because he was the son of his old age. And also Jacob made him a tunic of many colors. There's only one thing worse than treating one of your children more favorably than the other children, and that is to then take that child and give him a real colorful coat to remind all of the other brothers that you love this one the most. And make sure he has 10 older brothers that have just, slaughtered a city or something like that. I mean, it gives you an idea. You talk about a dysfunctional family. I'm telling you, it's really a mess here. This would have been a wild one to grow up in. And he's going to make it, so just relax. So he's got this multicolored jacket on, and that's not going to make him very popular. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. And when that says that they hated him, they hated him. It wasn't a thing of, well, I don't really like you tonight because you're a little creep tonight. Nothing like that. These guys really hated this guy. Now, Joseph dreamed a dream. And once again, just when you think things couldn't get worse than being the favorite and having a brightly colored tunic. Joseph dreams a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and I don't think he was trying to torment them. I think he was very excited about the dream that God had given him, and they hated him even more. And so he said to them, please, hear this dream which I have dreamed. He says, here's the dream I dreamed. You're going to like this. There we were, all of us, out in this field, and we were binding sheaves in the field. We were wrapping up the grain in these sheaves. And then, behold, as we had all of our sheaves on the ground, my sheaf arose and stood upright. Upright. And indeed, your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. How do you like my coat? This guy, he may be 17. He may be a young 17. I don't know what he doesn't have this figured out too well. But God is giving him a dream. God is giving him vision for his life. And he will need it. He will need it. Can I say this? That when you came to the Lord, and the dream and the vision that God placed upon your heart for your life as it relates to His kingdom, you hold on to that dream. It's going to be a very long, difficult trial for 13 years before he gets to see even the beginning of the fulfillment of this. Because he's going to go down into the mine, and this character is going to be developed in his life. But don't ever throw away. Not because of the mocking of older brothers or older brothers in the Lord or whoever, and the rebuking and the reviling and even your own discouragement. Don't throw away the dreams that are in your heart as it relates to God's kingdom. You need those dreams. You need to hold on to those things. God has given them to you for a reason. And so his brothers said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" And so they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Well, could it get worse? Oh, yes. This guy has a lot of dreams. And then he dreamed still another dream. and told it to his brothers. It might cast some doubt upon his wisdom at this point, but he's very excited. I mean, who are you going to tell out there in the field and all? And you can only tell your family what it is that's going on between you and God. And he says, look, I've dreamed another dream, and this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me. And the brothers kind of got a feel for this. Let's see. You got 11 brothers. We must be the 11 stars. You got one dad, that must be the sun. We got a mom around here, still Leah, that must be the moon. And so now he's saying, not only are you guys going to bow down to me, but everybody's going to bow down to me. I'm going to become the leader of this family. God has shown me I'm going to become the leader of this family. And really the leader of the whole world, the known world in time. And so he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to you and bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. He knew he had a special kid. He knew God was doing something here. And so he put that kind of under his hat to see what it was that would happen. And his dreams are going to come tumbling down, and for a time at least.